The stagecoach kicked up a cloud of dust as it pulled away, leaving behind a woman with secrets in her eyes and teaching papers that didn't match her trembling hands. "I heard your children need a teacher," Jessica said, but Thomas could see the fear lurking beneath her smile. What he didn't know was that by nightfall, he'd have to choose between his children's safety and protecting the mysterious woman who might be their salvation. The dust settled slowly in the afternoon heat as Thomas Carter studied the stranger standing before him. She was prettier than any woman had a right to be in a place like Cedar Ridge, with dark hair pinned back neat and proper, and a traveling dress that had seen better days but still showed quality in every stitch. Her hands, though, those caught his attention most. They were soft, unmarked by the kind of hard work that marked every other woman in these parts. "Mary Fletcher," she said, extending one of those soft hands to him. "I came about the teaching position." Her voice carried an accent he couldn't place, refined in a way that made him think of fancy schools back east. "I understand you've been without proper schooling for your children for some months now." Thomas nodded, removing his hat out of respect, though his eyes never left her face. Something wasn't sitting right, but with Emily and Samuel growing wilder by the day without proper learning, he couldn't afford to be too particular. "That's right, Miss Fletcher. Our last teacher headed back to civilization when her husband got work in Denver. Left us high and dry 3 months back." "How many children would I be teaching?" Jessica asked, her gaze drifting toward the small schoolhouse that sat empty at the edge of town. The building looked lonely with its windows dark and door hanging slightly crooked on worn hinges. "8 regular, counting my 2. Few more when the weather's good and families can spare them from chores." Thomas gestured toward the handful of buildings that made up Cedar Ridge. "It's not much, but we pay fair and provide room and board. Mrs. Henderson runs the boarding house, keeps a clean place." Jessica's fingers tightened around the handle of her carpet bag, the only luggage she'd brought with her. Thomas noticed how she kept that bag close, like it held everything precious in the world. "The position comes with living quarters?" "Yes, ma'am. Small room behind the schoolhouse, but it's private and warm. We keep the woodshed stocked through winter." Thomas studied her again, noting how she seemed to relax at mention of privacy. "Might I ask where you taught before? And what brought you all the way out here?" For just a moment, panic flashed across Jessica's features before she composed herself. "I completed my teacher training at the Women's Seminary in Kansas City. This is my first position. Actually, I felt called to serve where the need was greatest." Thomas nodded slowly, but something about her answer felt rehearsed, like words she'd practiced on the long journey here. Still, when Emily and Samuel came running up from their play by the creek, clothes dusty and faces bright with curiosity, he saw how Jessica's expression softened. "Pa, who's the pretty lady?" Samuel asked with the bluntness of a 6-year-old, while 8-year-old Emily hung back shyly, watching from behind her father's leg. "This might be your new teacher," Thomas said, placing a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. "Miss Fletcher, these are my children. Emily here's quick with her letters, but needs work on her numbers. And Samuel's eager to learn everything at once." Jessica knelt down to their level, her smile becoming genuine for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach. "Hello, Emily." "Hello, Samuel. I'm very pleased to meet you both. Do you like stories?" Emily nodded eagerly, while Samuel practically bounced on his toes. "I like stories about cowboys and Indians and big adventures." "Well, I know quite a few of those," Jessica said, and Thomas heard something in her voice that made him believe her. "And stories about faraway places and brave princesses, too. Can you start tomorrow?" Emily asked suddenly, her shyness forgotten. "We haven't had proper school in forever, and I want to learn to read the big books like Mommy used to." The mention of their mother brought a familiar ache to Thomas's chest, but he saw how Jessica's eyes filled with understanding rather than pity. "If your father agrees, I'd be happy to start tomorrow. We'll begin with assessing what you already know, then build from there." As the children ran off to spread the news to their friends, Thomas found himself studying Jessica again. Everything about her seemed too refined, too educated for a small frontier town. The way she spoke, the way she carried herself, even the way she'd instinctively known how to talk to his children, it all suggested breeding and education far beyond what a simple teacher training program would provide. "Miss Fletcher," he said carefully, "forgive me for asking, but you seem like you might be accustomed to finer things than we can offer here. Are you certain Cedar Ridge is what you're looking for?" Jessica's grip tightened on her carpet bag again, and Thomas noticed her glance toward the horizon as if expecting someone to appear. "Mr. Carter, sometimes what we're looking for and what we need are different things entirely. I need this position, and if you'll have me, I promise your children will receive the best education I can provide." There was something desperate in her voice that made Thomas's protective instincts stir, the same instincts that had kept his family safe in this harsh country. But there was also sincerity, and his children needed learning more than he needed answers to all his questions. "The job is yours if you want it," he said finally. "But Miss Fletcher, if there's anything you need to tell me, anything that might affect the safety of these children or this town, I hope you'll trust me enough to share it." Jessica met his eyes for a long moment, and he saw gratitude there mixed with something that looked like regret. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. You won't regret this decision." As Thomas helped her carry her single bag toward Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, he noticed how Jessica's hand shook slightly when old Pete Morrison tipped his hat to her, how she instinctively stepped closer to Thomas when a group of ranch hands rode past, and how she kept glancing over her shoulder like a woman being hunted. By evening, as Jessica settled into her small room and prepared for her first day of teaching, Thomas stood on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky red and gold. His instincts told him Mary Fletcher wasn't who she claimed to be, but his heart told him she was exactly what his children needed. He just hoped that whatever she was running from wouldn't catch up to them before he could figure out how to protect the mysterious woman who might just save them all. The morning sun streamed through the dusty windows of the one-room schoolhouse as Jessica swept the last of the cobwebs from the corners. She had arrived before dawn, determined to transform the neglected space into something worthy of the 8 eager faces that would soon fill it. By the time the children began trickling in, the room had been scrubbed clean, wildflowers gathered in mason jars brightened each windowsill, and the blackboard gleamed with fresh chalk marks outlining the day's lessons. "Good morning, scholars," Jessica said as Emily and Samuel burst through the door, followed closely by the Henderson twins, the Murphy boy, and 3 other children from nearby ranches. Her voice carried a warmth that immediately settled their nervous energy. "Please take a seat anywhere you'd like. Today we begin a grand adventure together." From his position near the barn, Thomas found himself glancing toward the schoolhouse more often than necessary. He'd told himself he was just checking on the children's welfare, but truthfully, he was curious about the mysterious Miss Fletcher and whether she could live up to the promise in those intelligent eyes. What he saw through the windows amazed him. Jessica moved through the room like a natural teacher, her voice rising and falling in animated storytelling that had every child leaning forward in rapt attention. She was telling them about ancient Rome, painting pictures with words of gladiators and emperors while seamlessly weaving in lessons about government and geography that should have been far beyond their rural education. "Now, who can tell me what makes a civilization strong?" Jessica asked, and hands shot up eagerly around the room. "Good land for farming," called out Jake Murphy, age 10 and usually more interested in fishing than learning. "Excellent, Jake. What else?" Jessica's smile encouraged more participation. "People who work together," Emily said quietly, and Jessica's nod of approval made the shy girl beam with pride. "Wonderful observations. Now, let me teach you a phrase the Romans used. E pluribus unum. Can anyone guess what that might mean?" She wrote the Latin words on the blackboard with elegant script that spoke of expensive education. Thomas frowned slightly. Where had a frontier teacher learned to write Latin? and speak it so naturally. Inside the schoolhouse, Jessica was dividing the children into groups based on their abilities rather than ages, something Thomas had never seen done before. She had Emily, who was already reading well, helping 6-year-old Samuel with his letters while she worked with the older children on mathematics that went far beyond simple arithmetic. Miss Fletcher asked Mary Henderson, one of the twins, "How come you know so much about everything?" Jessica paused for just a moment, that familiar flash of panic crossing her features before she smiled. "I've always loved learning, Mary. My my teachers believe that education should open doors to the whole world, not just the small corner we happen to live in." She quickly changed the subject, but not before Thomas caught her slip. Teachers, plural, and the way she'd hesitated suggested something more than a simple teaching college. As the morning progressed, Jessica demonstrated teaching methods that had the children solving problems, thinking critically, and participating in ways Thomas had never imagined possible. She taught them French words for common objects, had them calculate the distance between Cedar Ridge and various cities using basic geometry, and somehow made it all feel like play rather than work. During the noon break, Thomas found an excuse to approach the schoolhouse. "Miss Fletcher, I wanted to see how the children were settling in." "Oh, Mr. Carter, they're wonderful. So eager and bright." Jessica's face glowed with genuine enthusiasm. "Emily has a remarkable mind for literature, and Samuel's mathematical thinking is quite advanced for his age. With proper guidance, these children could achieve anything." "You seem to have quite a gift yourself," Thomas said carefully. "That Latin you were teaching, the geography lessons about European capitals, where exactly did you say you studied?" Again, that moment of panic. "The women's seminary has very comprehensive curriculum," she said, busying herself with rearranging already perfectly arranged books. "I was fortunate to have dedicated instructors." Thomas noticed how she avoided meeting his eyes, how her refined accent became more pronounced when she was nervous. Everything about her suggested a background far more privileged than she claimed. But watching his children's faces as they returned from their break, seeing the excitement and hunger for learning that had been missing for months, he decided his questions could wait. The afternoon brought more revelations. Jessica taught the children basic scientific principles using everyday objects, had them writing their own stories instead of just copying text, and somehow managed to give individual attention to each child regardless of their level. When little Samuel struggled with his letters, she patiently guided his small hand, her touch gentle and encouraging. "You're very good with children," Thomas observed when he stopped by again near closing time. "They're easy to love," Jessica replied softly, watching Emily help one of the younger children with a difficult word. "Children are honest in their emotions. There's no pretense, no hidden motives. They simply want to learn and grow." Something in her tone made Thomas wonder what kind of world she'd come from where pretense and hidden motives were concerns for a young woman. As the children gathered their belongings, chattering excitedly about the next day's lessons, several parents began arriving to collect them. Thomas watched their reactions as they heard their children reciting French words and explaining the Roman government structure. "Miss Fletcher," said Mrs. Murphy, Jake's mother, "I don't know what you did to my boy, but he actually wants to come back tomorrow. That's the first time he's been excited about school in his life. She made learning fun, Mama," Jake piped up, "and she says tomorrow we're going to learn about pirates and explorers and how they navigated by the stars." The other parents exchanged impressed glances, and Thomas saw the same mixture of amazement and slight bewilderment he felt himself. Jessica Fletcher was clearly far more than she appeared to be. After the children and parents departed, Thomas lingered as Jessica tidied the classroom. "Miss Fletcher, I hope you don't mind me saying, but your education seems quite extensive for someone fresh from teaching college." Jessica's hands stilled on the papers she was organizing. "I've always been a voracious reader, Mr. Carter. Books have been my constant companions." "Books are one thing," Thomas said gently. "But the way you speak, your bearing, your methods, They suggest private tutoring, perhaps finishing school. For a moment, Jessica looked like she might confess something, her eyes meeting his with a vulnerability that made his chest tighten. Then the moment passed, and she offered that practice smile again. Some of us are simply born to teach, I suppose. Your children are remarkable, Mr. Carter. Emily especially reminds me of. She stopped abruptly, turning away to gather her things. Reminds you of whom? Thomas asked softly. Of myself at that age. Hungry for knowledge, eager to understand the world beyond what I could see. Jessica's voice carried a wistfulness that spoke of dreams and disappointments. I should return to my room. Tomorrow's lessons won't plan themselves. As they stepped outside together, Thomas noticed a rider approaching from the main road. Jessica's entire body went rigid, her hand instinctively moving to that ever-present carpet bag. The rider turned out to be just one of the local ranchers, but Jessica didn't relax until he passed by with a friendly wave. Miss Fletcher, are you quite all right? Of course, she said quickly, but Thomas could see her hands trembling slightly as she fumbled with her bag, just tired from the excitement of the first day. They walked in comfortable silence toward the boarding house, Thomas noting how Jessica kept glancing around as if expecting trouble from every shadow. Whatever had brought her to Cedar Ridge, it wasn't just a calling to teach. She was running from something, and that something had her looking over her shoulder, even in this remote corner of the world. At the boarding house steps, Jessica paused. Mr. Carter, thank you for trusting me with your children. I promise you won't regret it. I can already see I won't, Thomas replied honestly. But Miss Fletcher, if there's ever anything I could do to help, I hope you know you can count on me. The gratitude in her eyes was so profound it nearly took his breath away. For just a moment, the carefully constructed walls around Mary Fletcher cracked enough to reveal the frightened, lonely woman beneath. Thank you, she whispered, then hurried inside before he could see the tears threatening to fall. As Thomas walked home to where Emily and Samuel waited with more questions about their wonderful new teacher than he could possibly answer, he found himself thinking less about Jessica's mysterious past and more about the way she'd looked at his children with such genuine affection, the way her whole face had lit up when they succeeded at their lessons. Whatever secrets Mary Fletcher was hiding, whatever had driven her to their remote town, one thing was becoming crystal clear. She was exactly what his family needed, even if he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was looking for her. 3 weeks into the school term, Thomas found himself inviting Jessica to Sunday dinner without quite planning to. The words just tumbled out as he watched her dismiss the last student for the day, her face glowing with the satisfaction of another successful lesson. Miss Fletcher, I was wondering if you'd join us for dinner this evening. The children have been asking, and I make a passable roast when I put my mind to it. He felt foolish the moment the words left his mouth, like a schoolboy asking a girl to a church social. Jessica's smile was genuine, not the practiced one he'd grown accustomed to seeing her wear around most adults. I'd be delighted, Mr. Carter. Shall I bring anything? Just yourself, Thomas replied, then added with a grin. Though if you could help me convince Samuel that vegetables won't actually poison him, that would be worth its weight in gold. That evening, as Jessica sat at their modest dinner table helping Emily cut her meat while patiently coaxing Samuel to try his carrots, Thomas felt something shift in his chest. She fit here, in his home, with his children, as naturally as if she'd always belonged. The way she listened to Emily's careful recitation of a poem she'd memorized, how she made Samuel laugh by turning his green beans into tiny soldiers marching across his plate, it all felt so right it scared him. Miss Jessica, Emily said suddenly, using the name she'd started calling their teacher, do you have any family? Brothers or sisters? Thomas saw Jessica's forked paws halfway to her mouth, that familiar tension creeping into her shoulders. I know, Emily, no brothers or sisters. What about your mama and papa? Samuel chimed in with the relentless curiosity of a 6-year-old. Samuel, Thomas warned gently, recognizing the signs of Jessica's discomfort. "It's all right," Jessica said softly. "My parents, they're very far away, Samuel. Sometimes families live in different places, and we can't see each other as often as we'd like." The sadness in her voice made Emily reach over and pat Jessica's hand with the instinctive compassion of a child who had lost her own mother. "That's okay, Miss Jessica. You can share our family. Can't she, Pop?" Thomas felt his throat tighten at his daughter's generous heart. "Of course she can, sweetheart." The gratitude in Jessica's eyes was so profound it nearly undid him. For a moment, he glimpsed the lonely woman beneath the careful facade, and he wanted nothing more than to promise her she'd never have to be alone again. As the weeks passed, these family dinners became a regular occurrence. Jessica would help with the children's evening routines, reading bedtime stories in voices that brought characters to life, teaching Emily to braid her hair properly, and listening to Samuel's endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how far away the stars were. One evening, as they sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed, Thomas found himself sharing memories of his late wife that he'd never spoken aloud to anyone. "Sarah used to say that Emily had the soul of a poet," he said, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "She was always making up little rhymes and stories, even as a tiny thing." "Emily does have a beautiful imagination," Jessica agreed. "Today she wrote a story about a princess who saved her kingdom not with magic, but with kindness and wisdom. It was quite remarkable for someone her age." "Sarah would have loved that," Thomas said quietly. "She always believed that true strength came from compassion, not force." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman. You must miss her terribly." "I do," Thomas admitted. "But lately, I find myself thinking less about the grief and more about the good memories. About being grateful for the time we had rather than bitter about what was taken away." He glanced at Jessica and saw her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What about you, Miss Jessica? Was there ever anyone special in your life?" The question hung in the evening air between them, and Thomas immediately regretted his boldness. But instead of deflecting as she usually did, Jessica surprised him by answering. "There is someone my family wanted me to marry," she said carefully. "But wanting someone to be right for you and them actually being right are very different things." "What happened?" Jessica's hands twisted in her lap, and Thomas noticed how she always did that when she was choosing her words carefully. "I realize that some prisons are made of silk and gold, but they're still prisons. Sometimes you have to run toward an uncertain future rather than accept a certain misery." There was pain in her voice and something else that made Thomas's protective instincts flare. Before he could stop himself, he reached over and covered her restless hands with one of his own. "Whatever brought you here, Jessica, I'm grateful for it. My children, we haven't been this happy since Sarah died. You've given us something precious." She looked up at him then, and in the fading light, Thomas saw tears threatening to spill over. "Thomas, The sound of horses approaching at speed cut through the quiet evening, and Jessica immediately tensed, her hand instinctively moving toward the carpet bag she kept always within reach. Thomas felt her pulse racing beneath his touch as a single rider thundered past their house without stopping. "Just someone heading to the Murphy place," Thomas said gently, but Jessica didn't relax until the hoofbeats faded completely into the distance. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know why I get so jumpy." "Yes, you do," Thomas said quietly. "The question is whether you trust me enough to tell me why." For a moment, Jessica looked like she might confess everything. Her lips parted, her eyes met his, and Thomas held his breath, sensing they were on the edge of something that would change everything between them. Then Emily's voice called from inside the house. "Miss Jessica, can you help me with my hair ribbon? It's all tangled." The spell broke, and Jessica pulled her hands free, the moment of vulnerability disappearing behind her usual careful composure. "Of course, sweetheart, I'm coming." As she hurried inside, Thomas remained on the porch, staring out at the darkening horizon. He was falling in love with Mary Fletcher, whoever she really was. But more than that, his children were falling in love with her too, and that made everything infinitely more complicated. Because Thomas was beginning to suspect that someone, somewhere, was looking for the woman who called herself Mary Fletcher. And when they found her, it would break all their hearts. The next morning brought a stranger to the general store, asking questions about a woman traveling alone. Mrs. Henderson mentioned it to Thomas in passing, but by then, Jessica had already seen the man, recognized something in his face that sent her hurrying home to stare at her packed carpetbag with desperate, frightened eyes. Her past was catching up, and she was running out of time to decide whether love was worth the risk of staying to fight for it. Thomas had been carrying his grandmother's ring in his pocket for 3 days, working up the courage to ask Jessica the question that had been burning in his heart for weeks. The children had been dropping hints with all the subtlety of a stampeding cattle herd, Emily whispering about how nice it would be to have Miss Jessica as a real mama, and Samuel announcing to anyone who'd listen that he was going to ask Miss Jessica to stay forever. The school had become the pride of Cedar Ridge. Parents from neighboring towns were asking about Jessica's methods, and the territorial education supervisor had written a glowing letter praising the remarkable progress the children had made. Jessica should have been celebrating her success, but Thomas noticed how she'd grown increasingly anxious, jumping at shadows and watching the horizon with frightened eyes. On Thursday evening, as they sat on his porch after another family dinner, Thomas decided he couldn't wait any longer. The ring seemed to burn in his pocket as he watched Jessica help Emily with her evening prayers through the open window. "Jessica," he began, then stopped himself. "I mean, Mary." She turned to him with those beautiful, haunted eyes. "Thomas, there's something I need to tell you." "There's something I need to tell you, too," he said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I've been thinking, and I know it might seem sudden, but please let me speak first." Jessica's voice was urgent, almost desperate. "Before you say anything else, before this goes any further, you need to know the truth about who I really am." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. He'd known this moment was coming, had seen it building in her frightened glances and sleepless nights. "All right, I'm listening." Jessica took a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she twisted them in her lap. "My name isn't Mary Fletcher. It's Jessica Whitmore, and I'm not a simple teacher from Kansas City." The name meant nothing to Thomas, but the way she said it, with such fear and shame, told him it meant everything to her. "Go on." "My father is Harrison Whitmore. He owns half the railroad lines between Chicago and Denver, along with steel mills, cattle ranches, and more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper. "I was raised to be a proper society wife, educated by the finest private tutors, trained in languages and literature and music, so I could be an ornament on some wealthy man's arm." Thomas felt the world shift beneath him. Jessica Whitmore, daughter of one of the richest men in America, sitting on his humble porch in her simple cotton dress, telling him she'd been living a lie. "When I turned 21, my father arranged my marriage to Charles Blackwood, a business associate nearly twice my age." Jessica's voice grew harder, angrier. "Charles was cruel, controlling, and he made it clear that once we were married, I would have no say in my own life. No voice, no choices, no freedom. I was to be a beautiful, silent decoration who produced heirs and asked no questions." "What did you do?" Thomas asked quietly, though he was beginning to understand. "I ran." Jessica lifted her chin with a defiance that made Thomas's heart ache for her. 3 nights before the wedding, I took some jewelry that belonged to my grandmother, stole the teaching credentials from my governess's room, and escaped with the help of a kitchen maid who'd seen too many bruises I tried to hide behind powder and long sleeves. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The refined speech, the advanced education, the way she flinched around strange men, the constant fear. Jessica hadn't just been running from an unwanted marriage. She'd been running from abuse. "Jessica," Thomas said gently, reaching for her hands. "There's more." She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "Charles and my father have been hunting me for months. They've hired private detectives, put up rewards, used every connection they have. They claim I'm mentally unstable, that I stole from my family, that I need to be brought home for my own protection. But you didn't steal anything. You said it was your grandmother's jewelry." Try explaining that to a judge when Charles has lawyers and political connections, and I'm just a runaway woman with no legal standing. Jessica's laugh was bitter. "In the eyes of the law, I belong to my father until I marry. Then I'll belong to Charles. Either way, I have no rights, no freedom, no choice." Thomas felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. The thought of anyone hurting Jessica, of forcing her into a life of fear and submission, made him want to ride to Chicago and have a very direct conversation with Harrison Whitmore and Charles Blackwood. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because a man was asking questions in town yesterday. Mrs. Henderson said he was looking for a woman traveling alone, showed her a photograph that could have been me." Jessica's voice broke slightly. "They're getting closer, Thomas. And you deserve to know what you'd be getting into if I what, Jessica?" She looked at him with such longing it nearly broke his heart. "I see the way you look at me. I see how Emily and Samuel have attached themselves to me, how they talk about wanting me to be their mama. I know what you were going to ask me tonight, Thomas. I can see the ring box outline in your pocket." Thomas pulled the small velvet box from his pocket, holding it in his palm like an offering. "Then you know my answer hasn't changed. I don't care if your name is Mary or Jessica or anything else. I don't care about your father's money or your past or the men who are hunting you. I care about the woman who makes my children laugh, who brings light into our home, who fits into our family like she was always meant to be here." "You don't understand what you're saying." Jessica stood abruptly, pacing to the porch railing. "If Charles finds me, he won't just take me back. He'll destroy anyone who helped me, anyone who got in his way. He has the money and power to ruin this entire town if he wants to. Let him try." Thomas rose to stand behind her, close enough to feel the tension radiating from her small frame. "Jessica, look at me." She turned, tears streaming down her face. "Thomas, I can't ask you to risk your children's future for me. I won't be responsible for bringing danger to Emily and Samuel." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I'm choosing you, choosing us, choosing to fight for the family we could be together. Emily and Samuel have already chosen you as their mother in their hearts. The only question is whether you'll choose us back. What if we lose? What if Charles takes me anyway? Then we'll have fought for love, and that's more than most people ever get the chance to do." Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Jessica Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you let me stand between you and anyone who tries to hurt you? Will you be Emily and Samuel's mother and my wife?" For a moment, hope blazed in Jessica's eyes, bright and beautiful. Then dust clouds appeared on the horizon, and the thunder of multiple horses riding hard toward town reached their ears. Jessica went pale. "They're here." Thomas saw the riders in the distance, still too far to make out clearly, but heading straight for Cedar Ridge. He felt Jessica trembling against him and made a decision that would change all their lives forever. "Then we'd better get married tonight, before they arrive. Pastor Williams can perform the ceremony, and by morning, you'll be Jessica Carter, legally my wife and under my protection." "Thomas, you don't know what you're risking." "I know exactly what I'm risking." He opened the ring box, revealing his grandmother's simple gold band. "The question is, do you trust me enough to take the leap?" Jessica looked at the approaching riders, then at the ring, then into Thomas's determined face. Emily and Samuel appeared in the doorway, sensing the tension but not understanding it, looking to the adults to tell them everything would be all right. "Yes," Jessica whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. But even as Thomas slipped the ring on her finger and pulled her into his arms, they both knew the real fight was just beginning. The riders arrived at dawn. 6 men in expensive suits looking completely out of place in Cedar Ridge's dusty streets. Charles Blackwood sat his horse like a man who owned the world, his cold eyes scanning the town with obvious disdain. Behind him rode Harrison Whitmore, Jessica's father, his face hard as granite. Thomas stood on the schoolhouse steps with Jessica beside him, her hand trembling in his. Pastor Williams had married them by lamplight just hours before, with Emily and Samuel as sleepy witnesses who thought they were attending the most wonderful surprise party of their lives. Jessica, Charles's voice carried across the morning air like a whip crack. In this foolishness, and come home. You've caused enough embarrassment to your family. My name is Jessica Carter now, she called back, her voice stronger than Thomas had expected. And this is my home. Charles dismounted with deliberate slowness, his hired men flanking him. Mrs. Henderson was very helpful in pointing us to the right house. Seems you've been playing schoolteacher. Jessica. How quaint. Harrison Whitmore stepped forward, his expression mixing anger with something that might have been concern. Jessica, what have you done to yourself? Look at you, living like some common frontier woman. Come home, daughter. We'll forget this madness ever happened. I won't go back to that life, Jessica said firmly. I won't marry Charles, and I won't be locked away like some fragile doll. You don't have a choice. Charles pulled out legal documents from his coat. These papers give me the right to bring my mentally unstable fiancée home for proper medical care. The local sheriff will have no choice but to enforce them. Thomas felt his blood boil. She's not mentally unstable, and she's not your fiancée. She's my wife, legally married as of last night. Charles laughed coldly. A marriage performed under false pretenses by a country preacher? My lawyers will have it annulled within the week. Maybe, Thomas said calmly. But until then, she's under my protection as my legal wife. By now, half the town had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Thomas saw Mrs. Murphy, the Henderson twins' parents, Jake Murphy's father, and a dozen other families whose children Jessica had taught. Their faces showed confusion, worry, and growing anger as they pieced together what was happening. You've stolen my daughter, Harrison accused Thomas. Filled her head with romantic nonsense when she's clearly not capable of making rational decisions. I've made the most rational decision of my life, Jessica said, stepping forward. I've chosen love over money, freedom over a golden cage, and happiness over duty to men who see me as property. Mrs. Murphy pushed through the crowd. This is the woman who's been teaching our children, who's made them happier and smarter than they've ever been. She's a liar and a thief, Charles snapped. She stole family jewels when she ran away. Jewelry that belonged to my grandmother, Jessica shot back. Jewelry she left specifically to me in her will, which my father conveniently lost. Thomas saw doubt flicker across some faces in the crowd. Jessica's calm explanation carried more weight than Charles's accusations. Even if that's true, Harrison said, you're still my daughter, and the law says you belong with your family until you're properly married. She is properly married. Pastor Williams spoke up from the crowd. I performed the ceremony myself, with proper witnesses and documentation. Charles pulled out a thick wallet. I'm prepared to compensate this town handsomely for the trouble my fiancée has caused. Enough money to build a new school, improve your businesses, bring real prosperity to this place. Thomas saw some townspeople exchange glances. It was a fortune by their standards. And if we refuse, asked Mayor Patterson, then you'll find your supply lines interrupted, your shipping delayed, your credit with territorial banks suddenly questionable. Harrison's voice was ice cold. My daughter comes home, one way or another. The crowd murmured uneasily. Thomas felt Jessica's grip tighten on his hand. Then Emily pushed through the adults, her small face fierce with 8-year-old determination. Miss Jessica is our mama now. You can't take her away. Samuel appeared beside his sister. She teaches us and loves us and makes us feel safe. Other children joined them, forming a protective circle around Jessica. Their parents watched, torn between fear and love for their children's happiness. Enough of this circus, Charles declared. Sheriff, I demand you enforce these legal documents immediately. The territorial sheriff, who'd ridden in with the group, looked uncomfortable but started forward. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but these papers appear to be in order. Thomas stepped between the sheriff and Jessica. You'll have to go through me first. And me, said Pastor Williams. And me, added Mrs. Murphy. One by one, the townspeople moved to stand with Thomas and Jessica, forming a human barrier between her and the men who wanted to drag her back to a life of fear. Charles's face went red with rage. You're all making a terrible mistake. When we return with federal marshals and court orders, you'll regret this defiance. Maybe, Thomas said quietly, but we'll regret abandoning someone we care about a lot more. Charles remounted his horse, his eyes promising vengeance. This isn't over, Jessica. You can't hide behind these farmers forever. As the riders thundered away, Jessica collapsed against Thomas, the strength she'd shown finally giving way to exhaustion and relief. Is it really over? She whispered. Thomas held her close, watching the dust settle. The first round is, but they'll be back with more legal power and federal authority. Then what do? Thomas looked at the townspeople still gathered around them, at his children holding Jessica's skirts, at the community that had chosen love over fear. We fight, he said simply. Together. 3 days later, Charles returned with federal marshals and court orders, expecting to find a cowed frontier town ready to surrender. Instead, he found something that stopped him cold. A telegram from the territorial governor's office declaring Jessica Carter's marriage legal and binding under territorial law. Thomas smiled as he watched Charles's face turn purple with rage. Seems Pastor Williams has a cousin who works in the governor's office. Amazing how quickly paperwork moves when it's for a good cause. But Jessica's real victory came in the form of a letter that arrived on the same stagecoach as the marshals. The envelope bore the seal of the Women's Legal Defense Society of Denver, and inside was documentation that changed everything. It appears, Jessica said, reading aloud to the gathered crowd, that my grandmother's was never legally voided. The jewelry I took rightfully belonged to me, which means I committed no theft. She looked up at Charles with steel in her eyes. It also means I inherited her property in Colorado, making me financially independent. Harrison stepped forward, his face showing defeat for the first time. Jessica, please. You're still my daughter. Come home, and we can work something out with Charles. Charles is welcome to find another bride to terrorize. Jessica replied firmly. I've found my family, and they've chosen me as much as I've chosen them. Emily tugged on Jessica's skirt. Does this mean you're really staying forever, Mama Jessica? Jessica knelt down to Emily's level, tears of joy streaming down her face. Yes, sweetheart, forever and always. Samuel launched himself into Jessica's arms. I knew you wouldn't leave us. I just knew it. The federal marshal, a decent man who'd seen enough of life to recognize happiness when he saw it, cleared his throat. Mr. Blackwood, it appears the lady is legally free to make her own choices. There's nothing more we can do here. Charles made one last desperate attempt. Jessica, you're throwing away everything. Wealth, position, a secure future. I'm not throwing anything away, Jessica said, standing with Thomas's arm around her and both children pressed against her sides. I'm claiming everything that truly matters. As Charles and his men rode away in defeat, the entire town erupted in celebration. Mrs. Murphy hugged Jessica with tears in her eyes. You gave us our children's future, and we gave you yours. That seems like a fair trade. 6 months later, Cedar Ridge had transformed into the most sought-after educational destination in the territory. Families moved there specifically for Jessica's school, bringing prosperity and growth the town had never imagined. The one-room schoolhouse expanded into a proper academy, and Jessica's teaching methods were studied and copied across the West. Thomas stood in the doorway of their thriving school, watching his wife teach a room full of eager students. Jessica was visibly pregnant now, glowing with the happiness of a woman who'd found her true calling. Emily, now 9, helped the younger children with their reading, while Samuel demonstrated arithmetic problems with the confidence of a born teacher. Mrs. Carter called out one of the newer students. "Tell us again about the Roman emperors." Jessica laughed, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Well, there was once an emperor named Augustus who believed that the strength of an empire came not from its armies, but from its people working together." As her voice filled the room with stories that brought history to life, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Jessica had arrived in Cedar Ridge as a woman running from her past, carrying lies and fear in her carpetbag. But she discovered something she never expected. A place where truth was more valuable than money, where love mattered more than status, and where a community could become family. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching Emily and Samuel play with the neighborhood children, Jessica leaned against Thomas's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it? Taking such a big risk for someone you barely knew?" Thomas kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of the wildflowers she still kept on her desk. "The only risk would have been letting you go. You brought light back into our lives. Jessica, you made us whole again." In the distance, the stagecoach approached with its weekly delivery of mail and supplies. But this time, Jessica didn't tense up or reach for a carpetbag. This time, she smiled and waved, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes the biggest lies lead us to the greatest truths. Jessica had claimed to be a simple teacher named Mary Fletcher. Instead, she'd become Jessica Carter, beloved wife, devoted mother, respected educator, and the heart of a community that had chosen love over fear. She had run away from one life and found her forever home in another. And in the end, that made all the deception, all the danger, and all the fear worth every moment.